Deep beneath the sun-baked earth of Crete, where shadows twist into monstrous shapes and ancient stones whisper forgotten secrets, lies the birthplace of a legend that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. The Minotaur, part man, part beast, isn't just a monster from a dusty old myth. It's a mirror, a reflection of our oldest fears, our hidden desires, and the very real history that might have sparked this terrifying tale. But how did a story about a bull-headed creature in a maze survive for millennia? And what does it tell us about the people who first trembled at its name? Strap in, because we're about to follow the thread through history's darkest labyrinth, past the crumbling ruins of Bronze Age palaces and into the minds of kings, artists, and storytellers who turned fear into legend. By the time we reach the heart of this mystery, you'll never look at the Minotaur or yourself the same way again. The tale of the Minotaur isn't just a simple monster story. It's layered with political intrigue, religious symbolism, and even hidden truth. Picture Crete at the height of its Minoan civilization, where bulls weren't just animals, they were sacred, worshipped in grand ceremonies. Some archaeologists believe the infamous bull-leaping frescoes found at Knossos suggest a real-life ritual that might have inspired the myth. Could the Minotaur itself be a twisted retelling of a priest or king wearing a ceremonial bull mask? Then there's the Labyrinth. Unlike the elaborate stone maze from later stories, the original may have been the sprawling palace of Nossos itself. A maze of corridors and courtyards so vast that outsiders could easily get lost within its walls. And here's a chilling thought. What if the sacrifices weren't purely myth? Evidence from other ancient cultures shows ritual offerings of young people to appease the gods. Could the tributes from Athens have been a dark historical reality, later woven into legend? The story of Theseus adds another layer. Hero myths often emerge from real political upheavals. Some scholars suggest the slaying of the Minotaur symbolizes the decline of Minoan power and the rise of Athens. If that's true, then the myth isn't just about a monster in a maze, it's about the brutal shift of power between civilizations, dressed up as an epic adventure. So was the Minotaur real? Not in the way we imagine, perhaps, but every piece of this myth connects to something ancient people feared, worshipped, or experienced. The truth might be hiding in the ruins, waiting to be uncovered. The ruins of Knossos rise from the Cretan landscape like a puzzle carved in stone, a sprawling, bewildering complex of courtyards, stairways, and corridors that seem to twist back on themselves. To step inside is to lose your bearings, just as the ancient Athenians might have when they faced the terror of the labyrinth. Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who uncovered this Bronze Age marvel in the early 20th century, became convinced he'd found the real inspiration for the myth. And it's easy to see why. The palace's design defies logic. At every turn, rooms connect in unexpected ways, passageways double back, and entire sections appear hidden from view. Some scholars argue this wasn't accidental. The Minoans may have designed it deliberately to disorient, creating a sacred space where only the initiated could navigate with confidence. For foreign visitors or enemies, it would have felt like stepping into a trap. Could the legend of the labyrinth have grown from whispers of those who entered and never fully escaped its secrets? But here's where the mystery deepens. While Evans's theory is compelling, not everyone agrees. Some historians point out that the word labyrinth originally didn't mean a maze at all. It might have referred to a ceremonial dance floor or even an intricate mining tunnel. And if that's true, then the connection between Knossos and the Minotaur's lair might be more symbolic than literal. Yet the palace undeniably holds clues. Frescoes of bulls adorn its walls, and beneath its foundations lie older, darker layers. Traces of human sacrifice discovered in nearby sites hint at rituals too chilling to ignore. Whether the labyrinth was real or imagined, Knossos remains a place where myth and history blur, where every crumbling corridor seems to whisper another piece of the story. Imagine standing in the grand courtyard of Knossos as the crowd holds its breath. A young athlete sprints toward a charging bull, grasping its horns to vault over its back in a breathtaking display of agility and courage. This wasn't mere spectacle, it was sacred. The bull-leaping frescoes adorning Minoan walls aren't just art, they're windows into a world where bulls were far more than animals. They were living symbols of divine power, central to rituals that may have birthed one of history's most enduring monsters. The reverence for bulls in Minoan Crete runs deep. Their images appear everywhere on pottery, seals, and towering altars. Some scholars argue these creatures represented strength, fertility, or even the earth itself. But the most striking evidence lies in the bull-leaping ceremonies. Unlike modern bullfights, these rituals weren't about conquest. They were acts of communion, possibly rites of passage where youths proved their bravery under the gaze of gods and kings. Over generations, could these sacred games have warped into something darker? One theory suggests the Minotaur's origins lie in the priests who donned bull masks during ceremonies, embodying the beast spirit. To uninitiated outsiders, these figures might have seemed like half-human hybrids, sparking terrifying rumors. Even more chilling is the possibility of real sacrifice. Archaeological finds in Crete reveal bones with markings consistent with ritual offerings. Were the tributes sent to the labyrinth a distorted echo of such practices? Yet the twist in this tale is how myths mutate. What began as a sacred tradition, bull worship, might have been reframed by rival cultures as monstrous. The Mycenaeans, who later dominated Crete, could have recast Minoan rituals as barbaric to justify their own rule. The Minotaur then becomes more than a monster. It's a political weapon, a way to demonize the old ways. So while the Minotaur may not have lurked in a maze, its essence was very real. It sprang from a culture that saw bulls as bridges between humans and the divine until time and retellings turned reverence into nightmare. The legend of Theseus storming the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur feels like something straight out of an ancient blockbuster. A lone hero, a terrifying monster, and a kingdom hanging in the balance. But this wasn't just entertainment for Bronze Age audiences. It followed a template we've seen in hero stories from Gilgamesh to Hercules, a chosen one facing impossible odds, conquering darkness and returning transformed. Theseus's tale checks all the boxes: a mysterious birth, a perilous quest, and a symbolic triumph that reshaped the world. What makes his journey particularly fascinating is how it mirrors real-world power struggles. When Theseus defeats the Minotaur, he's not just killing a beast, he's breaking Crete's grip over Athens, ending the brutal tribute of Athenian youths. Historians speculate this might reflect a turning point in Mediterranean history, when Mycenaean Greeks began eclipsing Minoan dominance. The myth could be a poetic retelling of Crete's decline, casting Theseus as the architect of a new order. But was there ever a real Theseus? Some argue he was loosely based on a Mycenaean-era leader, perhaps a warlord or reformer who challenged Crete's authority. Others point to his name appearing in fragmented Linear B tablets, though whether this refers to the hero or simply someone sharing the name remains hotly debated. What's clear is that by the time classical Athens embraced him as their legendary king, his story had been polished into propaganda, painting him as the ideal ruler, brave, clever, and fiercely Athenian. Yet the darker edges of his myth hint at something murkier. Later versions reveal Theseus as flawed, abandoning Ariadne, failing to change his ship's sails, and ultimately overthrown. These layers suggest a hero whose legacy, like the winding corridors of the labyrinth, resists simple endings. Whether man or myth, Theseus embodies a truth all great legends share. They're never just about the past, but about how each generation reshapes them to make sense of their own world. At the heart of the Minotaur's labyrinth, a single strand of hope shines through the darkness, Ariadne's thread. More than just a clever tool, it embodies the brilliance of human ingenuity in the face of chaos. Think about it, a hero lost in an impossible maze, armed with nothing but a length of string gifted by a woman who believed in him. That thread didn't just save Theseus, it became one of history's most enduring symbols. To this day, we use the phrase Ariadne's thread to describe any guiding principle that helps us untangle life's most complex puzzles. But the thread's brilliance is only half the story. Ariadne herself is a figure shrouded in contradictions. Daughter of the very king who ordered the sacrifices to the Minotaur, she defied her own family to help an outsider. Some myths paint her as a divine figure, a forgotten goddess of weaving and fate, while others depict her as a mortal princess whose heart was collateral damage in Theseus's rise to glory. Her abandonment on Naxos adds a bitter twist. How could the hero who owed her everything leave her behind? Archaeologists have long debated whether Ariadne's roots trace back to pre-Greek deities, perhaps a Minoan fertility goddess later absorbed into Athenian myth. The island of Naxos, where Theseus left her, was a cult center for Dionysus, who some say rescued and married her. Could this be a faded memory of an older religious tradition, where Ariadne's story wasn't tragedy but transformation? And here's the haunting question. Why does history so often reduce the women of myth to footnotes? Ariadne's thread is celebrated, but her agency fades behind Theseus's heroics. Yet without her, there would be no victory. Her legacy isn't just a tool. It's a reminder that every great legend depends on unseen hands, and sometimes the real magic lies not in the sword, but in the quiet strength of those who make heroes possible. There's a haunting irony in the story of Daedalus, the greatest inventor of Greek myth, a man whose brilliance built the labyrinth but couldn't save his own son from its shadow. More than just a craftsman, he represents the double-edged sword of human ingenuity, the power to create wonders and the danger of losing control over them. If the Minotaur is the monster in the maze, Daedalus is the mind behind it, a figure as complex as the twisting corridors he designed. Legends describe him as an artisan without equal, sculpting statues so lifelike they needed chains to keep them from walking away. His reputation spread so far that King Minos imprisoned him in Crete, fearing his talents might aid rivals. Yet confinement couldn't stifle his genius and his most famous creation. The labyrinth became a masterpiece of cruelty and precision. Some historians speculate that the structure's design might reflect real Bronze Age engineering feats, like the sprawling sewer systems or ritual spaces found in Minoan ruins. Could Daedalus have been inspired by the anonymous architects of Knossos, their achievements later mythologized into a single legendary figure? The tragedy of Icarus casts Daedalus in a different light. Fashioning wings from wax and feathers wasn't just an escape plan, it was a father's desperate act of love. The fall of Icarus, soaring too close to the sun, serves as an eternal warning about the cost of overreaching. But here's what often gets overlooked: Daedalus survived. He flew on, carrying the weight of his creation's consequences. That duality defines him, the innovator who outsmarted the labyrinth but couldn't outsmart fate. Archaeologists have debated whether Daedalus was based on a real person, perhaps a gifted artisan whose name became synonymous with craftsmanship. The Mycenaeans, who absorbed Minoan culture, might have elevated him to mythical status to explain advanced technologies they inherited. Bronze Age tools, intricate frescoes, even early prototypes of gears found in the Aegean, all could have been attributed to a singular, semi-divine genius over time. What makes Daedalus timeless isn't just his inventions, but what he symbolizes: the thrill and peril of pushing boundaries. Every time humanity builds something extraordinary, from skyscrapers to artificial intelligence, we replay his story. The wings didn't fail because they were flawed. They failed because ambition outpaced caution. And in that sense, Daedalus isn't just a relic of myth. He's a mirror reflecting our own restless drive to reach higher, no matter the risk. Few myths carry a name as instantly recognizable as the Minotaur, yet buried beneath its monstrous reputation lies a forgotten identity, Asterion, the Starry One. This celestial name whispers of a far older story, one where the beast wasn't just a terror in the dark, but something woven into the night sky itself. So how did a figure once tied to the cosmos become reduced to Minos' bull? The shift reveals how myths aren't static, they're reshaped by the hands of power. The name Asterion surfaces in fragments of early Cretan lore, sometimes as the Minotaur's birth name, other times as an ancient title for the island's legendary king. The connection to stars isn't accidental. Ancient cultures often projected their myths onto constellations. Bulls like Taurus held sacred significance across the Mediterranean. Some scholars speculate that Asterion might have originally symbolized a celestial guardian or a divine ancestor, later demonized by rival cultures. Imagine a time when this figure wasn't a monster but a luminous presence in Minoan belief, a bridge between earth and heavens. But history favors conquerors, not the conquered. When Mycenaean Greeks dominated Crete, their storytellers reframed Asterion into the Minotaur, a brutal hybrid embodying Crete's otherness. The new name anchored the myth to King Minos, painting him as a tyrant demanding human tribute. This wasn't just semantics, it was propaganda. By stripping away the celestial ties, the story became a tool to justify Mycenaean rule, casting Crete's old symbols as threats to be vanquished. Yet traces of Asterion linger. In some versions of the myth, the Labyrinth center held not just a beast but a shrine to forgotten gods. Could the Minotaur's lair have once been a sacred space, its starlit name a relic of rituals lost to time? Even the constellation Lupus near Scorpio was sometimes called the Beast in ancient star charts, a dim echo of a myth that once reached far beyond a maze. The two names tell a story of their own. Asterion reflects what was sacred to a civilization erased by history, while Minotaur mirrors the fears of those who rewrote it. One name belongs to the stars, the other to the victors who dragged it down to earth. The sun-bleached ruins of Knossos hold more than just crumbling walls, they guard whispers of something far darker. In the 1970s, archaeologists unearthed a chilling discovery. Skeletal remains not just buried, but marked by deliberate cuts and placed near altars. These weren't casual burials. The bones told a story of ritual, one that forces us to confront a question modern minds recoil from. Did the Minoans, that vibrant, artistic civilization, practice human sacrifice? The evidence is sparse but haunting. At a site near Nossos, children's bones showed knife marks consistent with ceremonial slaughter, dating to a period of natural disasters, perhaps earthquakes or famine. This wasn't random violence. The placement of the remains near sacred spaces suggests a desperate plea to the gods. And here's where the Minotaur's legend takes on a grimmer shade. If Athenians were sent as tributes to Crete, could the myth's feasts be a distorted echo of real sacrificial rites? But before we jump to conclusions, let's pause. Skeptics argue these bones might reflect funerary practices or even post-mortem rituals, not live sacrifices. Yet parallels elsewhere in the ancient world add weight to the theory. The Carthaginians, contemporaries of the Greeks, left clear evidence of child sacrifice during crises. Even in mainland Greece, myths like Iphigenia's sacrifice point to a cultural memory of such acts. What if the Minotaur's appetite wasn't just fantasy, but a mythic veil draped over a taboo truth? The twist lies in how cultures sanitize their past. Over centuries, raw history softens into symbolism. The Minotaur, once perhaps a priest performing dreaded rituals, becomes a monster. The labyrinth, a real place of terrifying ceremonies, transforms into a metaphorical maze. This isn't just storytelling, it's a survival mechanism, turning trauma into tales that can be passed down without paralyzing fear. So were the Minoan sacrifices. The bones hint at yes, but the full truth may never emerge from the shadows. What's undeniable is how deftly myth repackages reality, turning the unbearable into something we can endure, even ponder thousands of years later. The winding corridors of the Minotaur's maze don't just exist in crumbling ruins, they stretch inward, mirroring the tangled pathways of the human mind. Long before modern psychology gave us terms like the subconscious, ancient myths were mapping the same territory. That's the power of the labyrinth. It's more than a prison of stone. It's a blueprint for the battles we fight within ourselves. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist, saw myths as windows into universal human experiences. To him, the Minotaur wasn't just a monster. It was the shadow self, the hidden part of our psyche where we bury the traits we fear or deny. Theseus's journey through the labyrinth, a symbol of the courage it takes to face those buried truths. Jung believed we all have a Minotaur lurking in our personal maze, whether it's shame, anger, or past trauma, and true growth begins when we stop running and turn to face it. This isn't just theoretical. Think about the times you felt lost in your own thoughts, circling the same fears or regrets without an exit. That's the labyrinth in action, a mental loop where logic fails and instinct takes over. Modern therapy often borrows this imagery, guiding people to trace their thread back to the root of their struggles. Even the hero's reliance on Ariadne's thread resonates. Sometimes we all need a lifeline, a trusted friend, a therapist, or a moment of clarity to lead us out of the dark. Yet here's the twist. The myth suggests confrontation, not escape. Theseus doesn't avoid the Minotaur, he seeks it. That's the lesson buried in the tale. Our inner labyrinths aren't meant to be bypassed, they're meant to be traveled, understood, and ultimately transformed. Whether it's anxiety, addiction, or grief, the way out isn't around the beast, it's through it. The brilliance of this ancient metaphor lies in its timelessness. Thousands of years later, we still describe complex challenges as navigating a maze or facing our demons. The labyrinth endures because it's not just a place, it's a state of being. And the Minotaur, however we name it today, it remains the same primal truth. The things we fear most are often the ones we must meet head-on to emerge stronger on the other side. Long before special effects or horror films, ancient artists wielded brushes and chisels to bring the Minotaur to life, and their work survives in vivid detail. On a 6th century BC Greek vase, the beast rears over a fallen Athenian youth, muscles taut, nostrils flared, its human torso twisted with animal ferocity. This wasn't just decoration, it was storytelling in an age before mass media. Every stroke of paint or chip of stone reinforced the Minotaur's role as the ultimate other, a boundary between civilization and chaos. What's striking is how consistently artists emphasized captivity and struggle. In one Roman mosaic from Crete, the Minotaur crouches in a labyrinth's corner, chains binding its wrists, a far cry from the rampaging monster of later tales. These depictions suggest an evolving relationship with the myth. Early Greeks may have seen the creature as a symbol of conquered barbarism, while later Roman artists who adored all things monstrous leaned into its tragic, imprisoned nature. But why focus so relentlessly on this hybrid? Ancient art teemed with fantastical beings, sphinxes, centaurs, gorgons, yet the Minotaur held a unique grip on the imagination. Its unnatural fusion of man and bull tapped into primal fears of blurred boundaries, human intelligence paired with animal instinct, the civilized world colliding with untamed forces. Artists amplified this tension by placing the creature in scenes of confrontation, forcing viewers to confront their own unease. The materials themselves tell another story. Many Minotaur artworks come from drinking vessels, wine cups, and craters used at symposia, where elites gathered to feast and debate. Imagine the impact. As revelers raised their cups, they'd stare at images of Theseus driving a sword into the beast, a visceral reminder of Greek triumph. Here, art wasn't just reflecting myth, it was weaponizing it, reinforcing cultural identity with every sip. Yet there's a haunting subtext in these depictions. The Minotaur is almost never alone. It's shown with victims, captors, or the labyrinth's walls. Even in its terror, it's framed as part of a system, a captive of its own nature. That duality, monster and prisoner, may explain its enduring appeal. To ancient audiences, the Minotaur wasn't just a villain. It was a warning about the traps we build for ourselves and the beasts we risk becoming when we lose our way. The Romans didn't just inherit Greek myths, they remade them, twisting old stories to fit their own ambitions and fears. When they adopted the tale of the Minotaur, it wasn't just a retelling, it was a reinvention sharpened into a weapon of propaganda. Ovid and Virgil, two of Rome's greatest poets, took the monster from Crete and repurposed it as a warning, a reflection of the empire's deepest anxieties. Ovid's Metamorphoses paints the Minotaur not just as a beast but as a divine punishment, a grotesque consequence of human arrogance and broken oath. In his version, the creature is less a tragic figure and more a force of chaos, embodying everything Rome sought to tame. But here's the twist: Ovid wrote during the reign of Augustus, a time when Rome was obsessed with moral purity and control. His Minotaur becomes a mirror, reflecting the empire's fear of disorder lurking just beyond its carefully constructed borders. Virgil takes it further in the Aeneid, where the labyrinth isn't merely a prison, it's a metaphor for the treachery of the East. When Aeneas encounters a labyrinth-inspired mural in Carthage, the message is clear: foreign lands are deceitful, their beauty masking danger. This wasn't subtle storytelling, it was political messaging. By linking the Minotaur's maze to Rome's rivals, Virgil transformed an ancient myth into a rallying cry, justifying expansion by painting outsiders as monstrous. Yet beneath the propaganda, something unexpected emerges. Roman art often depicted the Minotaur with an almost pitiable humanity, bound in chains, eyes wide with desperation. Even as the empire used the myth to vilify enemies, artists hinted at a deeper truth, that monsters are rarely born. They're made by cruelty, isolation, or the whims of power. So when Rome claimed the Minotaur as its own, it revealed more than it intended. The myth became a paradox, a tool to demonize outsiders, and an unintended admission of how empires create the very monsters they fear. The Minotaur hasn't been confined to ancient stone or dusty scrolls. It's alive and evolving in the pages of modern literature. Its roar echoing through the imaginations of some of the greatest writers of our time. Gone is the simple monster of old. In its place stands a figure of haunting complexity, forcing us to ask who, or what, we should truly fear. Take Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The House of Asterion, where the Minotaur isn't a bloodthirsty beast but a lonely, misunderstood prisoner of its own labyrinth. Through its eyes, the maze becomes a gilded cage, and the sacrifice is an act of mercy, freeing visitors from a crueler world outside. Borges flips the script entirely. What if the monster was just a victim of perspective, trapped by stories told by its enemies? The effect is unsettling, forcing us to confront how quickly labels like monster can erase entire histories. Mary Renault's The King Must Die takes a different approach, weaving the myth into a coming-of-age tale where Theseus isn't just a hero, but a flawed young man navigating a world of political intrigue. Here, the Minotaur is barely a physical presence instead. It's a symbol of the brutality Theseus must grapple with, both in Crete and within himself. Renault's version asks us to consider whether the real labyrinth was never made of stone, but of power, violence, and the choices that shape a leader. These modern retellings share a common thread. The Minotaur is no longer just a foe to be slain, but a mirror held up to society's contradictions. Contemporary authors use its myth to explore isolation, prejudice, and the ways systems create, and then condemn the monsters they produce. In a world that increasingly questions rigid binaries of good and evil, the Minotaur's transformation from villain to tragic figure speaks volumes. Perhaps the most telling shift is how these stories handle Ariadne's thread. No longer just a tool for escape, it becomes a metaphor for empathy, the fragile but vital connection that allows us to see the monster as something more. That's the power of myth when placed in new hands. It doesn't just tell us who we were, it reveals who we're becoming. Crete's sprawling ruins whisper secrets, but they refuse to surrender all their truths. The Grand Palace of Knossos undeniably mirrors the legendary Labyrinth. Its bewildering corridors and ritual chambers feel ripped straight from myth, yet not a single carving or artifact bears the Minotaur's name. This absence forces us to reckon with a tantalizing question. If the monster wasn't real, why does its shadow cling so stubbornly to these stones? Some historians propose the labyrinth wasn't a maze at all, but a metaphor for something far vaster, Crete's thalassocracy, its sprawling maritime empire. Picture the Bronze Age Mediterranean as a network of trade routes twisting like labyrinthine passages, with Crete at its center. The Minotaur, in this reading, becomes a symbol of Minoan power, unpredictable, awe-inspiring, demanding tribute from dependent cities like Athens. When Theseus slays the beast, it's not just a hero's triumph, it's poetic justice for subject states breaking free. But here's where archaeology complicates the story. Excavations reveal bull iconography everywhere, golden figurines, altar frescoes, even rhyton vessels shaped like bulls' heads. These weren't decorative, they were sacred. A clay tablet from Nossos lists offerings to a deity simply called the Bull of the Mountain, hinting at a real cult that may have inspired the myth. Yet without written records directly connecting these finds to the Minotaur, we're left tracing shadows. The tension between evidence and legend reveals how myths function. They're not lies, they're meaning pressed into narrative shape. The Minoans themselves may have spoken of bull dancers and labyrinthine rituals, only for later cultures to warp those tales into monsters. Like a game of ancient telephone, each retelling added layers until the original truth became unrecognizable. What endures is the undeniable grip of the idea. Whether as palace, empire, or ritual, the labyrinth persists because it resonates. It's a mirror for every society's deepest anxieties about power, the unknown, and what lurks in the corridors we've built ourselves. The Minotaur's greatest trick wasn't hiding in a maze. It was convincing us for thousands of years that the maze was ever just a place. Imagine the Mediterranean world around 1200 BC, palaces crumbling, trade routes snapping like dry twigs, entire civilizations vanishing into silence. This was the Bronze Age collapse, a cataclysm so vast it reset the ancient world. And right in the heart of it lay Crete, its once mighty Minoan civilization reduced to ruins. But here's the fascinating twist. As Crete's real power faded, its mythic shadow grew larger than ever. The Minotaur, that bull-headed terror, first appears in Greek legends right around this time. Coincidence, or is this monster actually a distorted reflection of history itself? Archaeologists have long noticed eerie parallels between the myth and the facts. The Minoans weren't just any civilization, they were naval powerhouses, their influence stretching across the sea like the twisting corridors of a maze. When their palaces fell, likely due to a perfect storm of earthquakes, invasions, and climate shifts, their conquerors, the Mycenaean Greeks, inherited their legacy and their stories. But history is written by the victors. What if the Minotaur wasn't just a monster, but a mythic stand-in for the fallen Minoans, their once great culture recast as something monstrous to justify their downfall? Take the tribute of Athenian youths. Historians speculate this could symbolize the heavy toll Crete once exacted from mainland cities, whether through trade dominance or outright coercion. After the collapse, the tables turned. Suddenly, it was the Greeks shaping the narrative, transforming what might have been taxes or political hostages into a grisly sacrifice to a beast. Even the labyrinth fits, the sprawling palace of Knossos with its maze-like halls would have seemed alien and menacing to outsiders. Over generations, memory blurred with fear, and architecture became mythology. Yet there's another layer to this. The Minoans weren't just erased, they were absorbed. Their bull imagery, so central to their art and rituals, didn't disappear. It resurfaced in Greek myths, repurposed but never forgotten. The Minotaur, then, might be more than a cautionary tale. It could be a reluctant admission of cultural debt, a monster born from the uneasy fusion of old and new. So when we stare into the Minotaur's snarling face, we might not just be seeing a monster. We might be glimpsing the ghost of a lost world, one so powerful that even in defeat it couldn't be silenced. The labyrinth wasn't just a trap, it was a time capsule, preserving whispers of a civilization that refused to die quietly. One of philosophy's most enduring puzzles isn't found in ancient temples or dusty scrolls. It's hiding in plain sight, tucked into the planks of Theseus's ship. If every part of the vessel is replaced over time, does it remain fundamentally the same? The question seems simple, but its implications ripple outward, twisting back into the heart of the Minotaur's myth. Because legends, like ships, are never static, they're rebuilt with each retelling, their meanings shifting even as their names stay the same. Consider the Minotaur's evolution, from a celestial figure named Asterion to a condemned monster, from a sacred bull symbol to a political metaphor. With every culture that retold the story, another piece was swapped out until the original was buried beneath layers of new timber. The paradox forces us to ask, at what point does a myth become something entirely new? And yet, despite centuries of changes, we still recognize the beast at the story's core. This tension between constancy and transformation cuts deeper than storytelling. The Minotaur itself embodies duality, man and beast, divinity and abomination. In the same way, the myth exists in two states at once, a fixed point in ancient lore and a shape-shifting narrative that adapts to each era's fears. When Renaissance artists painted the labyrinth as a Christian allegory for sin, or modern writers recast the monster as a tragic outcast, they weren't corrupting the original. They were continuing its evolution, sanding down old planks and fitting new ones in their place. The brilliance of Theseus's paradox is that it refuses a single answer. Just as the ship is both the same and different, the Minotaur is both the ancient terror of Nossos and whatever meaning we assign it today. That's the power of myth, not to preserve a frozen truth, but to become a vessel sturdy enough to carry humanity's evolving questions, generation after generation. For centuries, the story of the Minotaur has been framed as a clash between men. The hero, the monster, the king. But step back, and you'll notice two figures standing just beyond the torchlight, Pasiphae and Ariadne. Their names might not echo as loudly as Theseus or the Minotaur, yet without them, the myth as we know it wouldn't exist. What happens when we shift our gaze from the labyrinth's center to the women who shaped its edges? The tale unravels and rewrites itself. Take Pasiphae, often reduced to a cautionary footnote, a queen cursed with unnatural lust, but dig deeper and her story crackles with themes far more complex. In some versions, her desire for the bull wasn't random madness but divine punishment, inflicted by Poseidon for her husband Minos' arrogance. Here's the irony: Pasiphae bears the shame while Minos escapes blame. Feminist scholars point out how her body becomes the battleground for male conflicts, her agency erased beneath the label of monster maker. Yet in earlier Cretan traditions, bulls were sacred, their unions with priestesses possibly ritualistic. Could Pasiphae's vilification be later Greek propaganda, twisting a once revered figure into a warning against female desire? Then there's Ariadne, the princess who defies her father with a single act of rebellion, handing Theseus the thread. Ancient art often shows her calm, resolute, a far cry from the fickle lover later myths depict. Her abandonment on Naxos is telling. Some interpretations suggest Theseus left her because she represented a tie to Crete's old order, inconvenient for a hero crafting a new Athenian identity. But in alternative endings, Dionysus rescues her, elevating her to divinity. This duality, victim or goddess, speaks volumes about how myths police women's roles, help the hero, then vanish. The Labyrinth's true shadows aren't just physical, they're the spaces where these women's voices were suppressed. Modern retellings, like Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls, give Pasiphae and Ariadne fresh urgency, framing the myth as a story about power, who gets to tell it and who gets trapped within it. When we listen closely, the creak of Daedalus's wooden cow or the whisper of Ariadne's spindle becomes something revolutionary, not just tools of the plot but acts of defiance. Perhaps the most provocative question isn't what these women did, but how differently the myth resonates when centered on their choices. Pasiphae's desire and Ariadne's betrayal aren't flaws, they're fractures in a world that couldn't fathom their complexity. The Labyrinth isn't just where the Minotaur roams, it's where these women's stories wait, coiled like threads, ready to lead us out of the old tale and into something new. The Minotaur isn't just trapped in ancient ruins, it's rampaging through modern movie screens, leaping off the pages of bestsellers, and even battling time travelers in distant galaxies. What does it say about us that a Bronze Age monster still holds its own against superheroes and space operas? From Percy Jackson's conflicted bull man to Doctor Who's labyrinthine prison planet, pop culture keeps reinventing this myth because it taps into something deeper than nostalgia. It speaks to the primal part of our brains that still fears the dark. Take the Hunger Games arena, a high-tech labyrinth where tributes fight to survive. The parallels aren't subtle: a maze, a monstrous system, and youth sacrificed for power. Susan Collins didn't need to name-drop the Minotaur. The DNA of the myth is there, repurposed for an age of reality TV and political spectacle. Even Westworld's metallic corridors echo Knossos, with humans playing both Theseus and the Beast. These stories work because they take an ancient blueprint and wire it with modern anxieties. But not all adaptations play it straight. Percy Jackson and the Olympians offers a Minotaur that's equal parts terrifying and tragic, a confused creature who bellows, "Where is my sister?" Before charging, that question reframes the myth. What if the monster isn't just a villain, but a lost soul searching for family? It's a small tweak that cracks the story wide open, proving how elastic these old tales can be. Then there's Doctor Who, where the Minotaur becomes a literal idea machine, feeding on human belief. The genius of this twist, it acknowledges why the creature endures. Myths survive because we keep feeding them. Every retelling, from fantasy novels to God of War's bloody battles, adds another layer to the Labyrinth, ensuring the Minotaur never truly dies. The secret to its staying power lies in its contradictions. It's a warning about unchecked power, King Minos' cruelty, a metaphor for the other, the beast as outsider, and even a mirror for our own duality, man and animal at war within us. Unlike dragons or vampires, the Minotaur isn't just a foe to slay. It's a puzzle to unravel, one that changes shape every time we shine a light on it. So the next time you spot those horns in a video game or hear a hero mention a maze, listen closely. That's not just a callback to Crete, it's the sound of a 3,000-year-old myth, still breathing, still demanding to be faced. Few creatures capture the primal tension between man and beast quite like the bull-headed hybrids that stalk the myths of nearly every ancient culture. While the Minotaur may be the most famous, its cousins lurk in unexpected places, from the fire-breathing bull of heaven in Mesopotamian epics to the horned warrior god Nandi in Hindu tradition. These aren't just coincidental similarities, they're clues to something deeper in the human psyche. Take Mesopotamia's bull of heaven, a celestial beast sent by the goddess Ishtar to punish the hero Gilgamesh. Like the Minotaur, it embodies untamed power, but with a twist. Here, the bull isn't confined to a labyrinth. It is the labyrinth, its very presence twisting the natural world into chaos. When Gilgamesh slays it, the act isn't just victory, it's civilization asserting order over nature's fury. Compare that to Nandi, the sacred bull who serves as Shiva's mount in Hindu lore. Far from a monster, Nandi represents devotion and righteous strength, his horns echoing the crescents of the moon in a cosmic dance of balance. Even the Celts had their own version. The horned god Nossos, often depicted with antlers rather than bull horns, yet tapping into the same symbolism. His image appears on coins and carvings from Gaul to Britain, a testament to how widely this figure resonated. Unlike the Minotaur's isolation, Nossos roams free, a guardian of forests and fertility. What unites these disparate figures isn't their appearance, but their role as bridges between worlds human and animal, chaos and order, earth and divine. The real revelation lies in what these myths reveal about ancient societies. Bulls weren't just livestock, they were walking metaphors. Their brute strength made them symbols of kingship, their fertility tied to the land's bounty, and their unpredictability a reminder of nature's caprice. When cultures from Crete to India imagined hybrids, they weren't just spinning tales, they were wrestling with humanity's place in a world where the line between wild and civilized was always perilously thin. Perhaps the Minotaur's greatest lesson is that no monster exists in isolation. Its echoes in global mythology suggest a shared language of symbols, one that transcends borders and eras. Whether feared or revered, these bull hybrids remind us that some truths about power, fear, and our own duality are too profound to be contained by a single story. Language doesn't just tell stories, it buries them. The name Minotaur seems straightforward, mashing together Minos, Crete's legendary king, and Tauros, the Greek word for bull. But scrape away the surface, and the roots plunge deeper than the labyrinth itself. Hidden in the cracks of ancient scripts and whispered through millennia of retellings, this monster's name holds clues to a far older tale, one where language itself becomes a maze. The first twist lies in those Linear B tablets, the earliest known Greek writing. While they don't mention the Minotaur directly, they're riddled with words like Tarno and Mino, possibly tied to bulls and rulers. But here's the catch. Linear B was borrowed from the Minoan's own script, Linear A language still untranslated. What if Minotaur isn't purely Greek at all, but a linguistic fossil of something older? Some scholars argue Minos might derive from a pre-Greek title, like Minoan for ruler, while Tauros could trace back to the Proto-Indo-European word Tauros, echoing across cultures from Celtic Tavos to Hittite Toru. The name isn't just a label, it's a palimpsest, layers of meaning rewritten. Each conquering tongue. Then there's the labyrinth's own name. In Greek, Labyrinthos evokes Labris, the double-headed axe omnipresent in Minoan art, a symbol of power and sacrifice. But in Carian, an Anatolian language, Labyris meant passageway. Two meanings, one artifact. Was the labyrinth originally a sacred space marked by axes, or a metaphor for the twisting paths of kingship? Even the word bull shifts shape depending on who's speaking. Homer's Greeks used Tauros, but the Minoans might have called it something lost to time, a word now buried under Knossos' stones. What emerges is a tug of war between languages where each translation bends the myth. When later Greeks called the creature Minotaur, they weren't just naming it, they were claiming it, reframing a possibly older, sacred figure as a monstrous foil for their heroes. Like Theseus unraveling Ariadne's thread, tracing these linguistic paths leads us to a humbling truth. Some words aren't just definitions, they're spells, ones that can conjure gods into monsters or turn history into legend with just a syllable's twist. Amidst the torchlight and drumbeats of ancient Crete, dancers once traced patterns so intricate they seemed to weave the very walls of the labyrinth into existence. The Geronos, or crane dance, wasn't mere entertainment, it was a living map of coils and turns, performed with ropes or joined hands to recreate the myth's twisting pathways. Picture it, a line of dancers spiraling inward like a nautilus shell, then unfurling outward again, their steps a physical echo of Theseus's journey. But was this sacred choreography a form of worship, a way to walk beside the gods, or something far more practical, a means of passing down survival knowledge long before written words could carry the tale? Archaeologists have uncovered traces of these ritual dances in fresco fragments and pottery shards, where figures move with almost mathematical precision. The patterns mirror the labyrinth's symbolic duality, order and chaos, entrance and exit, life and death, all contained within a single, unbroken line. Some researchers suggest these dances may have served as initiation rites, guiding initiates through symbolic trials, much like the hero's confrontation with the Minotaur. Others argue they were communal memory aids, embedding vital knowledge of navigation or agriculture into muscle memory through repetition. The deeper mystery lies in how these movements transcended Crete. Similar labyrinth dances appear across cultures, from the trotting lines of medieval European Troy games to the Hopi snake dances of the American Southwest. This universality hints at something profound, that the labyrinth isn't just a place but a primal human experience encoded in our very bodies. When we move in spirals or switchbacks, we're not just telling a story, we're embodying it, rehearsing our own searches for meaning in life's twists and turns. What's often overlooked is the role of rhythm. The pulsing beat of drums or stamping feet wouldn't just guide dancers, it would synchronize their breathing, their heartbeats, creating a collective trance state. In this altered awareness, the boundary between dancer and deity, between human and minotaur, might momentarily dissolve. Modern neuroscience offers a tantalizing clue. Rhythmic movement activates the same brain regions involved in spatial memory and emotional processing. Could these ancient dances have been a form of embodied storytelling where the body itself became the archive? The Geronos and its kin remind us that myths weren't just spoken or written, they were lived. Every turn of the foot, every twist of the torso was a silent dialogue with the past. And perhaps that's why the Minotaur endures, because somewhere in our bones we still remember how to walk the labyrinth, even when the music has faded. There's a reason monsters rarely look like us. Across cultures, they're hybrids, aberrations, creatures that defy neat categories. The Minotaur, with its unsettling fusion of man and bull, wasn't just designed to terrify. It was a walking boundary, a living reminder of the lines ancient societies drew between us and them. But those lines weren't just about physical difference, they mapped onto deeper anxieties about outsiders, rebels, and anyone who threatened the established order. Think about how the myth frames the Minotaur's origins. Born of Pasiphae's unnatural desire, imprisoned for its unspeakable appetite, the creature embodies everything Greek society deemed taboo, crossing species, defying norms, consuming the innocent. Yet look closer and the story reveals a cruel irony. The Minotaur isn't just a monster, it's a prisoner. Its labyrinth is as much a cage as a lair, a reflection of how societies often create the very threats they claim to contain. This pattern isn't unique to ancient Crete. History shows how cultures project their fears onto hybrid figures, whether literal or symbolic. medieval Europeans demonized half-breeds in bestiaries, colonial powers painted indigenous beliefs as savage, and modern media still codes outsiders as grotesque. The Minotaur's enduring power lies in its adaptability. It can stand in for invading armies, social deviance, or even repressed human instincts, depending on who's telling the tale. What's often overlooked is how these myths serve a purpose. By casting the feared as monstrous, societies justify control, whether it's Minos demanding Athenian tributes or modern policies targeting marginalized groups. The Minotaur's physical form, part foreign, bull, part familiar human, makes it especially potent. It's close enough to recognizable to unsettle, but different enough to condemn. Yet here's the twist: hybridity isn't just a source of fear, it's also a site of transformation. Contemporary retellings increasingly reclaim the Minotaur, framing it as a misunderstood outcast rather than a mindless brute. This shift mirrors real-world movements where the monstrous demand recognition, LGBTQ+ identities, disabled bodies, cultural hybrids. The labyrinth, then, becomes more than a prison, it's a battleground where definitions of humanity are contested. When we stare into the Minotaur's eyes today, we're forced to ask, who gets labeled a monster in our own world? And what might we discover if we dared to hand them Ariadne's thread, not to escape but to finally be seen? Modern gardens and galleries alike are breathing new life into the Minotaur's ancient prison, not as sites of terror, but as spaces for contemplation and wonder. Walk through England's Hampton Court maze, its hedges trimmed into dizzying spirals, or step into Japanese artist Tabemo's mirrored labyrinth, where reflections fracture into infinity. These aren't mere replicas, they're reimaginings that prove the labyrinth's power hasn't faded, it's evolved. What fuels this creative resurgence? Architects and artists tap into the labyrinth's dual nature, a puzzle to solve and a journey to savor. Unlike traditional mazes designed to confuse, modern interpretations often prioritize experience over escape. The Chartres Cathedral's medieval floor labyrinth, once trod by pilgrims on their knees, finds its echo in California's land art installations, where visitors trace paths not to reach an endpoint, but to disconnect from the noise of modern life. The shift is telling. Today's labyrinths trade fear for mindfulness, transforming the myth's brutality into a metaphor for personal reflection. Technology adds another layer. Interactive installations like Ars Electronica's digital labyrinths use motion sensors to alter pathways in real time, blending ancient symbolism with cutting-edge innovation. Here, the Minotaur isn't a beast but an algorithm, a glitching presence that reshapes the maze as you navigate it. Even video games like Hades rework the labyrinth into roguelike dungeons, where each run becomes a meditation on repetition and growth. Yet the most poignant reinterpretations emerge from psychology. Trauma recovery centers now incorporate labyrinth walks into therapy, framing the journey inward and back out as a ritual of healing. The parallel is striking. Where Theseus fought a monster, modern seekers confront inner shadows, emerging not with a sword but with clarity. The labyrinth endures because it's no longer just a myth, it's a mirror. Whether rendered in hedges, pixels, or footsteps on stone, it asks the same primal question, not how to escape the maze, but what we discover about ourselves while wandering its turns. Beneath the weight of ancient stone and myth, there's a truth the Minoans could never have anticipated. The labyrinth isn't just under Crete, it's inside us. When Sigmund Freud first likened the human psyche to an intricate maze, he wasn't reaching for poetic flair. He was drawing a direct line between the Minotaur's darkened corridors and the tangled pathways of our own unconscious minds. The beast in this reading becomes more than a relic of bronze and blood. It's the embodiment of everything we've shoved into the shadows. Freud saw the labyrinth as a metaphor for repression, those buried desires and traumas we wall off to function in daily life. But like Theseus, we can't ignore the monster forever. The Minotaur's growl manifests in unexpected ways, sudden outbursts of anger, inexplicable fears, self-sabotaging patterns. Therapy then becomes a kind of thread-guided journey inward, not to slay these parts of ourselves, but to understand them. After all, the beast wasn't born a monster, it was made, shaped by neglect and isolation. Jung took it further. To him, the Minotaur wasn't just repressed desire, it was the shadow self, the collection of traits we deny because they don't align with who we wish to be. Cruelty, envy, primal hunger, these aren't foreign invaders. They're aspects of our humanity we've disowned, left to fester in the labyrinth's depths. Jungian therapy often involves shadow work, a deliberate confrontation with these rejected pieces, not to destroy them but to integrate them. The goal isn't an empty maze but a self fully known. Modern psychology echoes these ancient themes. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, identifies automatic thoughts as minotaurs of a sort, unseen, unchecked narratives that steer us toward self-destructive loops. Mindfulness practices, meanwhile, teach us to walk the labyrinth without panic, observing our inner beasts without becoming their prey. Even the concept of trauma recovery mirrors Theseus's journey, revisiting the maze of memory, not to get lost again, but to reclaim what was left behind. What makes the myth so enduringly relevant is its refusal to offer easy answers. Confronting the Minotaur isn't a one-time victory, it's a lifelong negotiation. Every time we face a buried fear or acknowledge a hidden shame, we're reenacting Theseus's choice to enter the maze, and like him, we don't emerge unchanged. The real treasure isn't escape, but transformation, the courage to meet the beast and say, I see you. You too belong to me. After 3,000 years of firelight retellings and scholarly debates, one truth stands unchallenged: the Minotaur never really existed, and yet it will never truly die. This paradox lies at the heart of why myths like these outlast empires. They aren't just stories, they're psychic tools forged by ancient hands but sharp enough to cut through modern complexities. That bull-headed creature lurking in Knossos' shadows, it was never confined by stone walls. It was always waiting in the corridors of our collective imagination, ready to embody whatever fears or truths we needed to. Consider how effortlessly the myth adapts across centuries. For Bronze Age Cretans, it may have symbolized the terrifying power of nature and kings. For classical Greeks, it became a political allegory of Athenian triumph. Freud saw it as repressed desire, while today's storytellers reframe it as marginalized identity. Each era doesn't just retell the story, it rewires it, proving that legends aren't fossils but living things mutating to survive. Even the labyrinth transforms from a physical trap to a metaphor for systemic oppression, trauma, or the internet's endless rabbit holes. The real magic lies in how these ancient patterns still fit our modern locks. When we describe someone as monstrous or call a bureaucracy a maze, we're speaking in Minotaur. When athletes leap over obstacles like bull dancers or activists navigate oppressive systems with Ariadne's strategic cunning, the myth plays out in real time. These aren't coincidences, they're proof that certain stories become part of humanity's operating system, templates we instinctively reach for to make sense of chaos. So what replaces the Minotaur in our digital age? Perhaps algorithms that trap us in ideological echo chambers, or AI creations blurring the line between human and machine. The faces of our monsters change, but their function remains, to give form to what terrifies us so we can finally face it. That's the gift Theseus's myth offers, not a map to escape the labyrinth, but the courage to walk deeper, thread in hand, knowing the beast we meet might just be the part of ourselves we've been running from. If these echoes between past and present fascinate you, don't let the journey end here. Hit subscribe to join us as we keep unraveling history's greatest mysteries, because the labyrinth, like all great stories, always has another turn waiting.